So this happened 2 years ago on August 20th. I went out with my cousin for a pride event, and we had a good night. But at the end, this guy grabbed me, asked for my number. I didn't give it to him and gave him a fake name, but he wouldn't leave me alone. My cousin was busy talking to some random guy, so I went up to these girls pretending to know them. My cousin and the random guy she was talking to were walking right behind us, and the guy was still following me. Then the girls were going away, we weren't, so we stopped, and these two guys stopped and asked if we were okay. I told them what was happening, and they told the guy to leave us alone, and he did. The two lads, me, my cousin, and the guy she was talking to, continued walking to where we were going. I was getting on well with one of the lads, and we exchanged social media so I could let him know we went home okay. We didn't speak after that until a couple of weeks later, when I found out that the guy I had exchanged socials with was in court for child abuse and molestation of a minor. So, to that child predator, let's not meet. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. I'm your host, Phoenix. If you like the way these stories are narrated, please make sure to subscribe, like, comment, or share. It is greatly appreciated. I would like to take a moment now to acknowledge the elite members of the channel. Thank you all so much for your continuous support. This will now be the new format of these narrations. I will begin reading a story. There will be an ad afterwards. I will do the introduction. There will be an ad afterwards. And there will be no more ads within the video. With that being said, it is time to sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack for tucking and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Let's Not Meet Stories. This just recently happened to me at my local Walmart. So, I was by myself getting a fancy few things at Walmart late in the afternoon. I grabbed a cart and headed to the home and pharmacy section to find something. I stopped in the aisle with the protein bars to look for something specific as I set my cart to the side. It wasn't crowded at Walmart and no one was in the aisle at the moment. But then a man approaches me from the side and asks me something. I did not see him ever before and did not see him come in. He did not have a card or anything in his hands, and he was much taller than me. So I kept my distance, always on my guard, especially since I was alone. He asked me something, but I couldn't hear him, so I said, "Huh?" He repeats himself and says, "Are you from?" He lists a township that's 45 minutes from where I am. My flight or fight instincts kick in. I say no and try to walk away. When he then says, "You are very pretty." I awkwardly smile and try to walk away again, clearly not wanting to talk and extremely uncomfortable with this encounter. When he then asks, "Are you single?" I say not interested and very abruptly walk away as fast as I can. I knew something was suspicious, and I was worried if I'd run into him again, he might try to continue talking to me. He didn't pose a threat, however. The context of being alone and him saying I look familiar, even then he approached me from the side was suspicious. After that, I went to the checkout, checking to see if he was near, but I saw him walking in the opposite direction, which was a sign of relief, and quickly got in my car, making sure I didn't see anyone. He could have been harmless, but my instincts and his body language hit a red flag for me. So, strange guy in Walmart, I hope I never see you again. This situation happened a week or two ago and rubbed me the wrong way. Can you tell me if I'm being rationally weirded out or just paranoid? It was my day off and the weather was surprisingly tolerable for a Midwest winter, so I decided to take my dog to the dog park. The dog park belongs to the property I rent from, and is maybe a half a block away at most. So, to get to it, I have to cross my building's parking lot, leash my dog, and head down the sidewalk towards the parking lot. I noticed an older woman in a bright pink coat talking on the phone in front of the building ahead of me. She keeps pacing from the door to what I assume is her car, looking visibly exasperated and being very animated with her hand gestures. I assume she's a delivery driver who didn't get the correct access code to the building and was on the phone with a customer. Happens all the time in an area with mostly apartment complexes. I wasn't close enough to hear what was exactly happening, but I only have access to my building. Anyways, so I continue on. As I'm stepping onto the sidewalk, she notices me and shouts, "Hey," to get my attention, but somewhat aggressively and desperately. I'm unsure why she chose me of all people, as there was a couple of closer individuals entering and exiting their cars close to her. But either way, I say hello. She shouts, "Can you help me?" And I accept, as I'm worried something might actually be wrong with how she's acting. She begins talking, but I'm too far away to hear, so my dog and I take a few steps towards her so I can. "Can you give me directions to insert street here? My phone is dead." I immediately stop in my tracks and become a little cautious, as I know she was just on her phone no more than seconds ago. Trying to rationalize the situation, I tell myself that maybe her phone did die as soon as I walked up, and she wasn't able to use her GPS or contact anyone. Regardless, I step further from her and allow my attention-hungry dog between us just in case. In a way, I'm relieved that all she wanted were directions, so I happily help her. I describe the way she needed to go and tell her it was actually super close by and easy to find. I took extra time giving her the directions because I'm shitty at them and didn't want to get her stranded again. But no matter what I said, she was extremely confused. Whenever I would point left, she would seem perplexed and point in a completely different direction. At this point, I'm getting a little impatient, but listening to her try to relay the directions back to me gave me a chance to get a look at her. She was dressed very nicely, but her hair was messy and she was missing the majority of her teeth. She was a lot taller than little old me. I stand at a whopping 5'3" and older than I realized. Usually the people I live amongst are closer in age to me, and I hadn't seen her around before. I didn't think anything of this though, as we were relatively close to the highway and see all sorts of people come through. After the third try, she finally understands where she's supposed to go and calmed down a little. I tell her good luck and have a good one, and we both turn around to part ways, and she heads towards her car. After a few steps, I notice that the leash goes taut and my dog won't budge. I glance back to see what the deal was, and I see the woman walking towards me again at a faster than normal pace as my back is turned. This really catches me off guard because she's much closer than she started and doesn't seem at all worried about my 55-pound dog. I politely, and probably very squeakily, give her an "oh, have a good rest of your day" to remind her that our interaction is over. She casually stops moving towards me and says, "Thanks, you too," before heading back to her car for the final time. I head towards the dog park, as it's a populated area, and I would have to pass her again to get to my apartment. Plus, I promised my dog. Once we're at the park, I happen to look up towards the street to the pink coat lady, driving the complete opposite direction that I told her. And she's on the phone yet again. So her phone wasn't dead after all? Did she actually not need directions then? Was she pretending to be confused in order to talk to me? The whole situation just seems odd, but I don't want to deem anybody who might be lost or confused as a creep. So, lady in the pink coat, I don't know what your intentions were, but let's not meet again. I've never shared this story, but I feel the need now to share this story because it really affected me as a child. When I was about 12 or 13, I used to play a lot of video games with my best friend, and we often played shooters together. As you can imagine, it's easy to get frustrated, and at one point, I ended up breaking my PlayStation controller. Since I didn't have a spare and couldn't continue playing, I told my friend that I had to stop. He said I could come over and borrow his second controller, since he didn't live far away, just a short walk. I thought, okay, and told him I'd be over soon. So, I grabbed my keys and started walking to his house. It was already dark, and since it was winter, it was snowing and very foggy. While walking, I had a strange feeling, like I was being watched. I kept looking around, but didn't see anyone. When I arrived at his place and picked up the controller, I saw through a window that a man was standing in the middle of the street. I pointed it out to my friend, and we both wondered who or what was standing there. It looked like a person, but we couldn't make out any details, just a silhouette. Eventually, we decided to go outside and see if the person needed help, or if something was wrong. We stepped out and asked what was going on, but there was no response. The person just stared at us and then walked away. We were both confused and told his parents, but they brushed it off, thinking we were imagining things because we played too many video games. After a while, I figured it was time to head home. Since we had played video games together for a while, I almost forgot about the strange encounter. But when I was walking back, I started to feel the same eerie sensation of being watched. I saw a few passerby, but they all seemed normal, nothing strange. But just before I got home, I looked behind me one last time, and I saw that person again. This time, standing behind a tree, staring at me. Then, they started walking towards me, and eventually, they began running. I could tell it was an older man, probably around 60, but I was surprised at how fast he was running. He was shouting something in a language I didn't understand, but he didn't seem happy. I ran for my life, clutching my keys, and tried to unlock my front door as fast as possible. When I got inside, I quickly glanced back, but the man was gone. I rushed to my room and immediately told my friend what had just happened. He suggested I call the police, which I did. But since my description wasn't very detailed, the police took a report but didn't seem to take it too seriously. My parents were visibly shocked, but nothing ever came of it. In my village, 4 other people reported similar experiences, saying that someone was watching or following them. I was one of them, but no one was ever caught by the police. To this day, no one knows who this man is, whether he was trying to scare people or if it's something more sinister. No one knows for sure, but everyone agrees that it seems to be a man around 60 years of age. Beyond that, no one can give a detailed description. That day, I feared for my life. I've told many of my friends about this, and I've received mixed reactions. Some said it sounds like a spooky campfire story, while others believed me and were visibly scared. A few even told me they had experienced the exact same thing. So, man in the fog, I hope we never, ever meet again. This happened nearly 10 years ago, and I've never been able to forget it. It was mid-July, and I was out for a run. Important context. The path I usually took, with some variations, ran through a large public park but the way back to my house allowed me to take a shortcut through a smaller, non-connected park if I deviated from the main road and passed through a neighborhood. I usually didn't bother taking this route, but this particular day, I was a little uneasy because I had a car circle around the big park with some jerks leering and calling at me. Wanting to avoid the main road, I cut through the neighborhood and entered the small park. It was pretty empty, which was kind of odd for that time of year. As I was walking down the path to pass the playground, I noticed two people heading toward me. A man who seemed like he was maybe in his mid-30s, and a girl who couldn't have been no older than 14 or 15. They didn't seem like they were together, but they were close enough that I wasn't completely sure. The girl was wearing a bright pink shirt and was holding a skateboard under her arm. As I went to pass them, they spread out a little more, and I had to pass between them. The man nodded at me, but the girl didn't even glance at me. Something about the whole situation set off alarm bells, but I assumed I was just being paranoid because of my earlier run-in with the jerks at the big park. Still, I paused my music, but left my headphones in. I passed through the parking lot and made it to the sidewalk that led to a pedestrian street crossing that would eventually lead me home. The sidewalk was shaded by a bunch of trees, and I was avoiding some larger branches and twigs that had fallen during a recent storm. Then, as the crosswalk came into view, I shit you not, a branch snapped behind me. I turned to look behind me and see the girl sprinting towards me, skateboard held above her head like a bat. I didn't even think. I took off, made it across the crosswalk, and, stupidly, I stopped there, staring at her. We made eye contact, and her face was just completely blank. She lowered the skateboard, took another second to stare at me before turning and walking back into the park. I booked it home and didn't run again for the rest of the summer, though I never told my family why. For the rest of the time I lived in that area, I avoided that park, unless I was with a group of people. So to the strange man, and especially that crazy girl, I hope I never see you again. This story is 100% true, and it's always creeped me out. I think about it a lot. About 3 years ago, I was out for a late night walk in a park that was about 2 blocks from where I lived at the time. It was a pretty safe neighborhood, so I often felt comfortable walking around alone during the late hours. I remember it being 3:30 in the morning. Don't ask why I was up that late or walking around during that time. Let's just say I was going through some stuff. In hindsight, I know I wasn't smart, especially as a young woman. Anyway, I approached the park, which was lined with large bushes. There was also a street next to the park, and on the other side of the street was a large grassy field. Suddenly, I spotted a bald man carrying large objects wrapped in black plastic. He had on blue surgical gloves and a long plastic jacket. He seemed to be transporting these bagged items across the street from the park and into the field. I stopped and watched for a moment. As he began crossing the street again with more bagged items, he stopped when he saw me and ran towards the bushes. He stuffed the bags into the bushes and hid in them. I could see him clearly, and the whole situation gave me bad vibes. I quickly turned around and started walking back home. I glanced back to make sure he was not following me, and I saw his bald head peering over the bushes, staring at me. I started speed walking, and when I was about a block away, I saw him sprint across the street and hide behind a large tree. Again, all I could see was his bald head peering around the side of the tree, staring at me. By this point, my heart was racing, and I kept walking quickly. I didn't want to run because I didn't want him to know I could see him following me. My thought process was, if a lion is stalking you, It's not a good idea to run because they'll start chasing you. I just focused on staying calm and getting home safely. Finally, I reached my house and locked both the front and back doors. I tried to shake it off what had happened and go to sleep. The next day was completely normal. I decided to walk to the park in the daylight, where there were lots of people around, and I checked the bushes to see if he'd left anything behind. There was nothing. Later that night, I sat down to watch a movie. I decided not to go on any more late night walks after that incident. Even though nothing happened to me, it sure was creepy, and I realized it could have turned into a bad situation. You never know what someone like that is capable of. It definitely seemed like I had caught him doing something suspicious. While I was watching the movie, I got up to grab a glass of water. My kitchen has a window next to the sink with a view of the backyard, and I always kept the kitchen lights off at night so I could keep an eye on the yard without anyone being able to see me. When I looked into the backyard, to my surprise, I saw him standing in the middle of my yard, just staring at my house. I knew it was him because, even in the dark, I could make out his pale, bald head. I immediately cracked open the window and yelled, "Hey!" He took off running, leaving the gate to my fence wide open. Since then, I never saw the man again. I still have no idea what he was doing that night, or what his intentions were in following me home and stalking my house. But I don't think I want to know. So, to the bald-headed man that stalked me home, that I caught in the park doing suspicious things, let's not ever meet again. I work for a university in a resident assistant position. On weekends, we usually work in teams of 3 with 2 people, walking through a building and one person at the front desk checking people in. While me and my coworker were walking on the 9th floor engaging with students and enforcing the rules of the residence hall, my coworker suddenly received a call on our work phone, surprisingly from our on-campus police. She picks up the phone to a woman frantically crying for help. Before she can respond, the phone is hung up. This was especially a scary moment for us because of the authenticity of the woman's crying, unless it was an audio recording of a movie. I have no doubt that this was a real person in extreme distress and not a prank. The worst part about the whole situation is that we had received the same call a few months before with the same people working at the same time and on the same floor. With our team of 60 plus people, it is extremely unlikely to work with the same 3 coworkers twice. When we started our shift, I actually made a joke that we could get the same phone call, and we did. After getting the phone call twice, we both agreed that they were accidentally redirected 911 calls, especially since the number that was listed was literally the police phone number. We called the non-emergency number, same number, different extensions, and talked to the dispatcher, who was not too helpful. I don't really blame him because it is such a random event. He took our names and said he would report it. However, the thing that creeped me out even more is that he mentioned that they hadn't received any phone calls at all that night, and therefore nothing could have been accidentally redirected. This is when my mind suddenly clicked. Earlier, near the start of the school year, I had received a call from the same campus police number, and it was just my boss who was asking me to come to her office and help a lost student. As I got the call, I remember panicking as it was a campus police caller ID. This was before either of the calls of the woman crying. I told her about her caller ID being wrong and she agreed it was weird, but retired literally weeks after the talk. At the time, I didn't find this weird, but now I look back at it. I think the call begging for help might have come from her office, which is now empty. Me and my coworker walked to the office hallway, which is connected to our building, and tried getting into her office, which was locked. It is important to mention, we got the call both times at around 10:40, and it is now completely dark out, with no one around, especially in the staffing area. All the offices were completely inaccessible to the public. But one room me and my coworker had, we had a key for. We opened the door and found one of the old phones in the office and used it to call our work phone. You guessed it. It rang as campus police. Now we were scared. We cleared the rest of the buildings for anyone in distress and even checked a local emergency pilot students could use to call for help. After finding nothing, we went our separate way and ended our shift an hour after midnight. Now I am sitting here trying to figure out what the hell that poor woman was calling us for. Why did she hang up? Why did this happen twice with the exact same unlikely circumstances? Why was the caller ID from the police? This is getting long now, but I will make some important notes. Our third coworker is a man with a thick accent. He could not have prank called us from the boss's phone and pretended to be a woman. The first callback in October was of a woman crying and saying, "Please help." The second call I didn't hear as well as my coworker received it. She said it felt different, but was definitely a woman crying and begging. I am in an area with a lot of human trafficking and feel a strange sadness and fear that this may be what I heard. I have worked here for 2 years and am good friends with most of our team. No one has experienced this but us. I only have two possible theories. The call was a redirect from the police and the dispatcher chose to hide his mistake. Someone stunk it to the boss's office and called us begging for help. I am writing this partially because I'm too scared to sleep and partially to know if anyone can think of a better reason for the calls. So, to the crying and begging woman, I really do hope you find some help. I should have known something was wrong when we chose that campsite. It was way too isolated, tucked deep in the northern Arizona woods, far from any kind of civilization. But we were excited. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. My friends and I, along with my dog Max, had been planning it for weeks. The sky was clear and the air had that crisp bite to it that always made me feel alive. We set up our tent in a small clearing and the trees surrounding us like silent watchers. The fire crackled, throwing shadows against the trunks. We joked, roasted marshmallows, and swapped stories. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the darkness settled in, something in the woods shifted. It wasn't a noise at first, it was more of a feeling. Max, my dog, started acting weird. He was usually laid back, but tonight he couldn't stop pacing. He kept his eyes on the tree line, his body stiff. At first, I figured he was just jumpy, but then he started growling, low and slow, the kind of growl that sends a chill right through you. I stood up, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand at attention. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, but he didn't respond. His eyes never left the edge of the woods, and his growl deepened. "Is he okay?" my friend Jess asked, her voice trembling slightly. I I don't know," I said. "He's usually not like this." Then we heard it. It was distant at first, like the low howl of a coyote, but it sounded wrong, too deep, too human. It sent a shiver right down my spine. Max's growl grew louder, sharper. He was barking now, but it wasn't the usual excited bark. It was frantic, like he was trying to warn us of something. "That's not normal," Tom said, his voice shaky. Coyotes don't make noises like that. I looked into the woods, trying to make out anything in the darkness, but there was nothing. The trees were still. The wind had died down, and then it came again. This time, much closer. A slow, rasping sound, almost like someone dragging their feet through the leaves. But it wasn't a person. Not quite. Max's bark reached a fever pitch, his tail tucked between his legs. I could see the fear in his eyes now. "Guys, we need to go," I said, my voice tight. "Now." But before any of us could move, the growl came again, and this time it was accompanied by something far worse. A low, gurgling laugh. A laugh that didn't belong to any animal I knew. It wasn't even human. It was something else. Something stepped into the edge of the clearing, and I froze. My heart stopped. It was tall, way too tall for a person. The silhouette was twisted, like it had been stretched unnaturally. At first, I thought it was some kind of wild animal, but the shape didn't make sense. The limbs were too long. The way it moved was too fluid, too unnatural. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. And then, the most horrifying thing happened. It spoke. But it didn't speak with words. It mimicked my voice. Not perfectly, but close enough to make my blood run cold. "Sarah, Sarah, come here," it whispered, dragging my name through the air like a knife. Max whimpered and darted behind me, and the creature didn't move closer. It just stood there, watching us. Its eyes, red, glowing faintly, seemed to pierce straight through me. There was a moment where I thought I saw something shift within the thing, like it was wearing someone's skin, but I couldn't look away long enough to make sense of it. "Run!" Tom finally screamed, snapping me out of my trance. We bolted, not caring about anything else, just the desperate need to get away from whatever that was. We didn't stop running until we were miles from that campsite. And when we finally dared to look back, there was nothing in the trees. No sound, just the faint rustling of the wind. I never went back to those woods, and I never will. But every now and then, when the night is too quiet, I hear that laugh again. It's just a whisper, but it's enough to make me remember what we saw. And I swear, sometimes I think I hear Max's bark, calling me from the woods. And when I listen close enough, I hear it again. "Sarah, come here." So, to whoever was out there in the woods or whatever it was, let's never meet again. I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar, specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can give 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife make it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife with a scope that costs literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I did it. I took it to the range and sighted it in. There was an area that was prepared with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck with easy-to-find spots, that I could set up that overlooked a large, easy to navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. The spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbit or owls. The deer that I had seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night, but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m. and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left and taking some practice shots. I heard a crunch come from behind the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear. It was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up from the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something, twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then, he did something I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt beneath his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it, a voice coming from that direction, a very compelling female voice. "Help! I'm lost!" There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights were trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I've been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? "Help, please, I can't walk." The voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good I mistook him for a bear. That's a fucking trap. This guy is trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off of him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw him smile. The thermal scope has an effect that makes animals' eyes appear white. How in the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. "Fuck off," I screamed in that direction. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. Easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. What would I tell the cops? I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "The next one will fuck you up. Go away." He stayed on all fours, and this time, I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass, like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left towards the tree line, opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope. He was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get the hell out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck, breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab, but kept the rifle in the passenger seat, and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard, just 50 miles past of it. He was so spooked, his mom, my cousin, had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole about one of these crazy stories. I'm not saying what I saw definitely was a wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such thing exists, I may have dodged quite a bullet that night. Or maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, I thought I'd share. So, to the crazy naked guy out there making all kinds of ruckus and scaring the shit out of me, I hope I don't run into you again. This happened pretty recently. I work in property management. I was not supposed to be working alone that day, but my manager and coworker called in sick. My other coworker had requested time off that we all forgot about. I voiced my concerns because the property is in a crime-ridden area, and I've had some bad experience in the past. I actually transitioned to a different role because I no longer felt safe, but they offered me a lot of money to come back, so I did. The front doors stayed unlocked during business hours, so literally anybody could walk in. Also, it's a large and busy property. I needed someone with me just to help with all of the tours and residents. Nobody was able to do anything, so I called one of our sister properties and begged for their leaser to come help me. They agreed, but the leaser was going to have to leave early. I agreed and was just happy to have someone help. Flash forward to an hour before closing, and the leaser had to go. Literally as she walked out, this disgruntled man walked in holding a duffel bag. I hate to profile him, but he was clearly homeless and not all there mentally. He walked up to me and handed me his ID. I asked how I could help him, and all he could say was, "You don't respect veterans." I again asked how I could help him, and he couldn't give me a straight answer. I was getting fed up when the coworker who had requested the day off happened to come in just to say hi. My coworker instantly knew something was off, so he came over to investigate. The homeless guy didn't like my coworker asking him all of these questions. So he opened up his duffel bag and started sorting through it. He pulled out a piece of women's lingerie and threw it on my desk. Then he pulled out a box, and in that box was an SD card. He was trying to put it into my computer, and I told him not to do that. He listened to me but proceeded to rummage through his bag. He seemed irritated because we kept telling him, "If you can't tell us how we can help you, then you need to leave." At this point, I'm getting scared that he is going to pull out a gun and just light us up. Instead of a gun, he pulled out a knife. Instantly, both me and my coworker started screaming at him to put the knife away and leave. He eventually put the knife away but refused to leave. I messaged my manager, who was out sick but lived on site, to please call the cops and told him there was a guy with a knife in the office. My coworker, who was with me, didn't physically force him out, but he guided him out by walking towards him and making himself look threatening. Finally, the dude leaves, and we immediately lock the doors. He kept trying to come back in and was cussing up a storm outside. Eventually, he made his way to the convenience store that is attached to the building. Within 30 seconds of him going in, about 4 squad cars pull up. We pointed at the store, and they ran in there. The guy got aggressive with the police, so they beat him and ended up detaining him. I told the police to look in his bag for the knife, and they found it. I identified the weapon and answered some of the police questions. I didn't press charges because this was clearly a mental health crisis, and jail isn't going to reform that. He needs serious professional help. The DA pressed charges on my behalf, and the courts granted me a protection order. They also let him go without bail. The last update I got was that he didn't show up to his court hearing, and now there's a warrant out for his arrest. I wonder why. I have not seen him since the event took place, and that's all I really care about. So, to the man who pulled a knife on me, I really hope we never meet again. So about 7 years ago, I had an online date who, after I told him a second date wouldn't be happening, decided to show up at my place of work. Needless to say, after that, I was extremely hesitant to dive back into the pool of online dating. In fact, since then, I can count on one hand the number of men I've dated from online. But my sister and my best friend have both met men over the last year on an app that connects through Facebook. It's used to help filter out catfishes and also tries to find mutual friends of friends that would match you with what you're looking for in a partner. So, over the last month, I've been talking to guys here and there, but hadn't yet really found one I was ready to move beyond text with. Then this guy came along. We chatted in the app, and he was really nice and seemed safe. After almost 30 weeks of daily texting, I agreed to a date. For the first time ever, I did not stalk his social media profiles because I wanted to stop myself sabotaging. I tend to dig so deep that I know too much before the date and have already made my decision that there will not be a second date. Yes, I'm extremely paranoid. So, I show up to the first date and it's okay. He's mostly quiet and kind of shy but polite. I know I have a big personality and can dominate the conversation, so I decide to give him a second shot. As the week leading up to date 2 goes on, I start to get apprehensive and tell myself not to sabotage this. I realize because I didn't want to stalk his profiles, I don't know his last name, so I text him and ask. He seems hesitant to tell me. He asks me why I need to know, so I respond jokingly that I typically ask before the first date, so I can know who my murderer is. But we're beyond that, and now I simply just want to know who I'm dating. It takes him a while to respond, but he sends it finally, and then doesn't text again for a while. I keep my promise to myself and don't social media stalk him. I tell some friends who start to seem hesitant about me meeting him again. Date 2. I show up at the restaurant, my choice, and it's pretty empty, so there is plenty of parking right up front. I park and wait. I see another car pull in, assuming it's him. He drives past all the open spots, my car included, which he knows because he walked me to it after date 1. He parks over at the side of the building, gets out, walks past my car, and texts that he saw me in the lot. It seemed a little awkward, but I ignored it. We enjoy the date and spend an hour and a half talking on and off until the restaurant closes. We discussed where in the city we live, general directions, and the fact that we lived in those areas our entire lives. We also discussed social media, and he claims he has no social media account. This should have been a red flag since the app takes Facebook. Although the conversation was much better, I wasn't sure that I was ready to tell him I wanted to see him again. So I figured I would go home and think about it. He walks me to my car, but walks uncomfortably close behind me. I ignore this and turn to awkwardly give him a hug and say goodbye. I don't open the car until he's walked away after a bit of a pause. I leave and get out on the road to head home. There aren't many cars in that area, as it's a heavily restaurant-laden area, and most are closing for the night. I get up to the main road I need to turn down to go the direction I live in, and notice the car behind me gets into the turn lane. I was not going home because I actually wanted to make a quick stop at the grocery store to grab some items I needed for dinner the following night. The light turns red, and they sit extremely far back. I look in my mirror and realize it's him. No big deal. I'm sure it was just a coincidence that he's going this way. There are other stores this way as well. I refuse to become paranoid and overthink things. So I get up to the intersection the store is at and note he's still in the far lane. So I hop into the left-hand turn lane to get to the store and notice he cuts over 2 lanes to get behind me. That seemed odd, but maybe he didn't know where the entrance to this shopping center is. Still, a really odd coincidence he'd be coming this way, especially without sending a text or something acknowledging he's behind me. I mean, we're the only cars on the road. I pull into the store and note he pulls in 1 row before I do. I decide to loop around the lot and pull back out onto the service road. I slowly drive back to the main road, noticing he gets out of the car and scans the parking lot. Not a casual scan like, is there a better parking spot, but a prolonged, where are you scan. I get back out on the main road and drive all the way to another out-of-the-way grocery store that I actually used to work at, knowing it's a safe place that will be on a more heavy populated end of town, with some friends who will be there to make me feel safe. Needless to say, I haven't heard from him since, and I think he knows I know. It took me a while, but I found his social media. His first name was not what he told me. I dug through my texts with him until I found a screenshot he'd sent me of an Instagram page, which listed mutual followers. Another red flag I should have remembered. He obviously had an Insta. I start digging through the accounts listed until I find one that's not private, and I find his profile. This leads to the ability to reverse Google images until I find his Facebook, which has a different first name and a city that is nowhere near where he claimed he lived. Time to delete my dating profile again. So, to the guy I thought was genuine, that obviously lied to me and stalked me, let's not meet. This took place about 4 years ago. We went away as a family for a wedding in a popular wine region. The wedding was on a lovely estate with a barn repurposed for weddings. I had been drinking and was a little bit tipsy, but wouldn't say drunk. But some of the details are a little bit hazy. At some point into the night, during the reception, I think it might have been about 10 p.m. or so, me and my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife, wanted to go for a walk around the estate. I don't really remember why we wanted to go for a walk away from the party, but I just remember leaving and then we started to walk down one of the roads. These are rural roads and properties, so distance between each property is large and either side of the road had bushland. There were basically no streetlights, and there was little to no noise aside from the party, which we could still hear in the distance. I remember walking down the road for about 5 minutes or so, and at some point started to feel uncomfortable, feeling like I was being watched. I remember looking at a light ahead in the distance, about the same height as the trees. My girlfriend made some comment about why the hell was there a light and how it made her feel uncomfortable. I made some joke about it being a UFO and we kept walking. The uneasy feeling kept growing. Then I heard some movement in the tree line to our left, the crunch of dried leaves underfoot. I turned subtly and saw two people in black hoodies just off the road in the tree line, matching our pace alongside of us. It was very dark and I couldn't make out any features, but from what I can remember, they weren't large guys or anything. More so like light to medium build. I tried not to draw any attention to the fact that I saw them. I tried my best to remain calm and felt instantly sobered up. I turned to my girlfriend and said something like, "All right, that's probably far enough. We've got to get back for speeches soon, and they are going to start wondering where we disappeared to." My girlfriend agreed, and we turned to start walking back. When we turned, so did the people in the hoodies, and continued to walk alongside of us in the tree line. I don't know how neither me or my girlfriend didn't notice them sooner, because it was dead quiet out there, aside from some crickets or cicadas. There were no cars along the road that we could see at least, so I'm not sure how they even got there. Like I mentioned, distance between properties is far, and I find it unlikely that they were neighbors or something also going for a walk. My girlfriend also noticed them at some point and tried to whisper something to me to draw my attention to them, but I just pretended like I didn't see anything and kept saying that people from the wedding are going to start looking for us soon. We ended up making it back to the estate where the wedding was without anything else happening. When we got back, all the adrenaline left my body, and I was absolutely exhausted. I had no idea what their intent was, but it still scares the shit out of me when I think back to it, and what could have happened if we didn't turn back when we did. So, to the two people dressed in dark clothing following me and my girlfriend that night, I hope we never run into you again. This happened a few days ago when I went to a festival in a city 2 hours away from my home. I booked a hotel room for 3 days, and this happened on the second day. I had just woken up and was slightly hungover, so I decided to go eat a late lunch. This was at about 5 p.m. I got back at around 7 p.m., and as I was approaching the entrance to the hotel, a guy in a suit holding a computer bag followed me to the door. He looked professional and like he just got back from some sort of meeting, so I didn't think too much about it. I had an empty bottle of Coke in one hand, so I struggled to pull out my card to open the door. I found it weird that he just stood behind me when he could have just opened the door if he was staying in the hotel. but I really did not realize that until after. Once I got into the building, however, I noticed his weird behavior. He followed me to the reception because I needed to throw away the bottle, and that's when I realized he was following me back to the elevators. When I got to the elevators, he stood a few feet beside me and watched me press the up button. I was getting more and more suspicious, and I got really anxious when he walked into the elevator with me. I gave my back to him and pressed my floor number and moved to the right to let him press his floor number, which he didn't. And that set off my alarms. I have social anxiety, and I couldn't bring myself to confront him. So I just stood in silence and waited for the door to open. When the door opened, I walked out, and he followed close behind me. The room was at the end of the hall, and he followed me about halfway before a group of girls, clearly tipsy, came out of their room, and by God's grace, I somehow knew one of them. I made a big deal out of meeting her, and they invited me to go clubbing with them. I obliged and just talked with them as I watched the guy slowly reverse to the elevators and get on one. When we finally went down, I noticed he was not in the lobby, and I did not see him for the rest of my stay. I really do not know what that was about, but it shook me to my core. Like I said, I have really bad anxiety at times, and this made me feel like vomiting. What scared me even more is that I am a physically big guy. I hit the gym almost every day, and I tower over most people. So I never thought something like this would happen to me. What freaks me out the most is that he just followed me so blatantly. I really do not know what to make of what happened. But if anyone has any idea as to what this guy was up to, please feel free to share. So to the guy in the suit that felt like stalking me almost to my hotel room, let's never meet again. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true Let's Not Meet stories. I would like to take this time and acknowledge the members of Back to Ashes and the new listeners. Thank you all so much for your continuous support, for without you, I would not have a voice and there would not be a Back to Ashes. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. Until next time, please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.